American Secession, The Looming Threat of a National Breakup by F. H. Buckley, Chapter 2, When Secession is Politically Correct. This is what Woodrow Wilson had spoken about in his 14 points in the Right of National Self-Determination, January 1918. He made a point of mentioning that the Austro-Hungarian Empire had broken up around that time into two larger areas, Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia. And then later, of course, we find out that those two areas broke down into about 9 separate areas. And the chapter that we're looking at here is talking about the similarity between that larger empire and the United States, which could be argued is overlarge and has been in a state of losing power and consequently less caring. It's here when Buckley introduces the notion of progressive nationalism. He talks about nationalism as promoting trust. In fact, he mentioned that John Elster calls trust the cement of society. People rely on each other when they trust each other. They rely on the promises that they are giving to each other. In other words, trusting societies they're wealthier because there's promises made and, well, promises kept. There's solidarity promoted by nationalism. There's an attachment to each other. There was an article by Josh Morgan in 2014 which Buckley had mentioned that 1/3 of Americans say we cannot trust our fellow citizens. And as this is being recorded in 2020, that truth is ever more present to those looking around. And it is this lack of trust that is really stretching the bonds of solidarity. So perhaps it's time to split and live with people that are more like us, that we have a bond of solidarity with, that we can trust, and perhaps that society could become more prosperous. We could look after each other. We might even develop generous social welfare programs, very similar to the social welfare programs that we see in capitalistic societies, such as those in Finland and Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. Buckley makes a point of saying that nationalism is very much a progressive ideal. It's from this point in the chapter that we go into progressive secessionism, and he talks about a number of different movements that are happening. You may remember from the first chapter, makes a point to say that we're not in 1860. Again, we're not looking at this through the lens of American slavery as we have seen in the American Civil War. We're in a different place, and the movements of secession are different today. And he talks about 3 specific ones here in the United States. There's the Yes California Independence movement, started by Marco, or at least advocated by Marco Ruiz Evans, called Calexit, kind of like Brexit. And the main thrust of that movement is that there's a financial case for California, the 5th largest economy in the world, to leave the Union, to leave the United States. In 2016, it was noted that the state of California paid $103 billion more to the federal government than it received back, and that many of the social programs that Californians evidently want in their lives in terms of environmental protection, as an example, are simply not supported by Washington. And they're sending money to, in fact, here the quote is, California loses billions supporting people who hate us and our culture. There is a movement of self-determination there. To be fair, conservatives living in other parts of the country want nothing to do with California and its values. A second movement was mentioned, that of Cascadia, where Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, sort of an alliance from Vancouver to Portland, as proposed by the Cascadia Independence Party, could not only have a secession movement where states leave the United States, but a province could leave Canada, the Canadian government, and form another third country. Again, similar ideals, similar ideas of what the future should hold, and have solidarity with each other. There is the Second Vermont Republic, which was mentioned. And Vermont's an interesting case because from 1777 to 1791, Vermont itself was an independent country. Vermont's an outlier in that it is both rural and liberal. I mean, it is, after all, the home of Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy. But in the early 2000s, the Middlebury Declaration was offered because there was an idea that during the George W. Bush administration, the national government was, quote, clumsy, unresponsive, and unaccountable. Now, remember from the first chapter we talked about Don Livingston, who of course is very much a Southern partisan, who does not like women in the military or even same-sex marriage. And I guess when you think about a Don Livingston juxtaposed with someone like Marco Ruiz Evans over in the Calexit movement, it doesn't really matter who is right and who is wrong. What matters is that they are not wanting to be together in the same country. In fact, they're not rivals, Buckley says, but they're allies. They have very different notions of what they want in their respective sphere of influence and control, but they don't want to do it within the sphere of the American government. Now, of course, there's a number of different international movements. The New Flemish Alliance, which was looking to remove Flanders out of Belgium. There's the Quebecois, the Quebec separatists of Canada, the French-speaking part of Canada primarily, the Catalan separatists of Spain. I think of the Basque separatists of Spain, which weren't mentioned in the book but come to mind. And then, of course, even the Scottish in Great Britain. We see both in America and internationally, historically and in the present time, secession movements. Some have been peaceful. Some have been, for example, when Czechoslovakia became the Czech Republic, it was peaceful, done without a bullet being fired. And then, of course, we have our own secession movement from Great Britain when the American colonies became an independent country. Secession, Buckley says, starts to look good and even politically correct. There is a time and a place for people who no longer have trust, solidarity, or desire affinity with each other to go their separate ways. And, in fact, can advocate for progressive, with a capital P, values. And in the case of conservatives, that they could create an image of society, a vision for themselves that is in accordance with their values. This brings us to the end of Chapter 2. Next week we'll be entering Chapter 3, Secession, a how-to guide. Looking forward to it.